but cheaply produced and with a very limited circulation. He envisioned it surpassing India's slick illustrated weekly. It should be more popular than Time or Life magazine of America. And why not? Krishna was not a poor man. Abhay ambitious subscription program by approaching the many prominent and wealthy men of New Delhi. Then by Krishna's grace, he would soon be able to print color photo and use high quality paper for Sajanath Osani. He would give it a best effort depending on Krishna soliciting subscribers. He could take his book manuscript and try to get them published. Dr. Alagappa in South India Gita Upanishad. No doubt there were many, or perhaps Bhakti Saranga Goswami would be willing to publish Abhay's work with funds from the Gaudiya Sangha.
Abhay soon received a letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami's assistant, carefully instructing him how to travel to Delhi at the least expense. He was to travel by train third class to Delhi and from there take a tanga. Since tangas at the station gate charged too much, Abhay should first walk about 100 meters towards the right hand side of the station, where he would find a cheaper one. Where he to ride alone, he should pay no more than 1 rupee and 12 annas. But he should with another passenger. That would be a cheaper. Keeping the crematorium to your left hand side, the assistant instructed him. If you look towards the right, then you will be able to see our red flag and the signboard written in Hindi and English. When you reach here, we will pay for the tanga. At the Gaudiya Sangha, disconcerting state of affairs. In the absence of their guru, Bhaktisara brahmacharis were quarreling and shirking their duties, and as a result, the preaching and donation gathering were being neglected. Cleanliness, deity worship, cooking, and even peace amongst the devotees were below standard. And like most of the mathas of the God brothers, the Gaudiya Sangha was poor. Abhay had come thinking he would be editing a magazine, but he found himself contending with the devotees. He learned that the brahmachari responsible for giving public lectures had not done any preaching. The devotees who had previously been holding kirtanas in people's homes were now negligent, and the errand boy refused to run because he had lost his bicycle. Then a brahmachari handed Abhay a letter from Bhakti Saranga Goswami requesting him to take up the general management of the matha. Inspire everyone to be engaged in service, otherwise, I do not know how we are going to print the English monthly magazine since we don't have much money in the fund and since the brahmacharis are quite careless. Maharaj wrote that he is unable to take the responsibility of the management. It will be very nice if you could keep your eyes on these affairs. And Abhay found other obstacles in trying to produce Sajjana Toshani, no typewriter, and bad relations with the printer. In a few days, Abhay received another letter from Bhaktisaranga Goswami telling him what articles to print, cautioning him not to change essential elements in the magazine and reminding him of his special duty. I have asked Akinchan Maharaj keys of my room to you so that you may use my room only for your office work. As you are there, you should try to maintain peace in the ashrama for giving necessary instructions to one and all. Abhay saw that he could do no editorial work until the laxity and petty quarreling in the ashrama stopped. But when he tried to help as Bhaktisaranga Goswami had directed, some of the devotees, the spiritual master, complaining. It was against many obstacles that publisher's deadline for the August 1955 issue of Sajjana Toshi, the printer's delay, the magazine did not come out until September, when at last the first copies were delivered. Abhay sent several to Bhaktisaranga Goswami in Calcutta asking for his response. Somebody else would like to read? Haribol, somebody else.
Yeah. Abhay never heard from his godbrother directly, but received further instruction from Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, who pointed out various mistakes in the issue without mentioning whether Bhakti Saranga had been pleased with it. The errors were mostly technical matters of style. Abhay had done the contents page in a different way and had not printed Bhakti Saranga Goswami's name exactly as he had wanted it on all his articles. Regarding Abhay's request for a typewriter, Ramananda wrote that if the matters are distinctly written, there is no need in them being given to the printer in typewriting. Abhay wrote to Bhakti Saranga Goswami requesting him to return to Delhi and establish a peaceful atmosphere in the mat. Regarding Sajjana Toshini, Bhakti Saranga Goswami had suggested that the paper for the cover be improved and that the whole magazine be done on nicer paper by an up-to-date press, and Abhay agreed, but improvements depended on money. The suggestion that the paper may be printed from Calcutta is all right, but my suggestion is that either in Calcutta or in Delhi, we must have our own press with good equipments so that we may be able to broadcast the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all the important languages, especially in Hindi and in English. Hindi is meant for all India propaganda, while English is meant for worldwide propaganda. Abhay further reported that since it was almost impossible to expect a printer to work speedily from handwritten manuscripts, he had already rented a typewriter. He also mentioned his ideas for increasing the number of subscribers. Abhay's son Vrindavan came to live with him for a few months at the Gaudiya Sangha. There was no question of Abhay and Vrindavan simply associated with his father, following the routines of the mat and helping Abhay in his duties. One day, a prominent advocate, the president of the Hindu Mahasabha, paid an unexpected visit to the Gaudiya Sangha. The mat was mostly deserted, and there was so Abhay and Vrindavan received the prominent guest, cooking for him, offering him prasadam, and acquainting him with the activities of the Sangha. When Abhay wasn't busy managing the disorganized mat and working on Gaudiya Patrika and Sajjana Toshini, he spent his time preparing a Hindi translation of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Although he was more accustomed to writing in English and Bengali, he reasoned that as long as he was preaching in Hindi-speaking areas, such a book would be important. Bhakti Saranga Goswami wrote that he wanted to print only 500 copies of Sajjana Toshini for the September issue, but Abhay wanted to print more. After making an agreement with the printer that the charges would be the same for 1,000 copies as for 500, he wrote Bhakti Saranga Goswami informing him of the good news. Abhay also told him that he had recently secured a donation of printing paper and that he had arranged for a 1/4 reduction in the postal charges. So why, for the matter of saving some papers, we shall not print the full number? In my opinion, we should print more than 100 copies every month and distribute them, 1,000 copies every month and distribute them in large scale. But Bhakti Saranga replied through a brief postcard that they should print no more than 500. Abhay continued his attempts to improve Sajjana Toshini. For him it was not a perfunctory duty, but absorbing preaching. In a letter to Bhakti Saranga Goswami, he expressed anxiety over waiting for him to send articles for the next issue. Funds were scarce, so scarce that Abhay had no decent dhoti, and yet he continued to envision a glorious future for Sajjana Toshini. I wish to see this paper just to the standard of Illustrated Weekly, with numerous pictures in order to make it a very popular literature, and for this I wish to move myself to secure subscribers as well as advertisers. I wish to visit good businessmen, insurance companies, and government officers in this connection, but I have no proper dress at all. I want 2 sets of good dresses in order to take up this responsibility, and I should be glad to have your decision on this matter. It is my heart's desire that this paper is improved to the highest elevation. Haribol, so Shilavati is here with me tonight, so she's going to read now.
Jai.
Requested that Bhakti Saranga Goswami help him publish his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita. Some non-Bengali gentlemen were donating the book and had assured Abai that they would pay 25 rupees per volume. Abai requested a loan of 600 rupees under any arrangements suitable to the Bhakti Saranga Goswami for publishing the first part of this work. If this part is sold out, Abai wrote, the other parts will automatically come out. But just as life and work on the Sajjanatoshana under Bhakti Saranga Goswami's hand produce strain for Abaya's ambitions for increased circulation and his strong editorial opinions also created strain for Bhakti Saranga Goswami. In response to Abaya's letter, Bhakti Saranga Goswami's secretary, Ramananda, wrote a letter full of flowery praises of Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, both with the intent of dismissing him from his position with the Gaudiya Sangha. With innumerable humble obeisances at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, Srimad Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, we
The screen bigger, so it moved. It's actually here without income, I think. Yes.
Yeah. Without income or institutional shelter, Abhay began staying in various homes in Delhi, living from week to week wherever he received an invitation. In terms of food, clothing, and shelter, these were the most difficult times he had ever gone through. Since his childhood, there had always been plenty of food and good clothes, and no question of where he would live. He had been a pet child of his father, and he had received special guidance and affection from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But now Abhay sometimes felt alone. Homeless, he moved around Delhi from one temporary residence to another, a Vishnu temple, a room at the. But he was seeking donors, preaching from Bhagavad Gita, writing. His goal was not to find a permanent residence, but to print his transcendental literature and to establish a pure, powerful movement for spreading Krishna consciousness. Abhay made a list of several books he wanted to publish. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrit, 2000 pages. Gita Upanishad, 1200 pages. Science of Devotion, 300. Lord Chaitanya's Samkirtan movement, 300. Message of Godhead, 300. Bhagwanyar Katha, Bengali, 50 pages. But to print, he needed donors. He called on wealthy men in their offices and homes, presenting his manuscript and explaining his mission. He had a list of donors, but few responded. And when he did receive a donation, it was or 10 rupees. Occasionally, he would receive a letter of appreciation or endorsement. One appreciation came from Naren Das Rai Bahadur, a retired executive engineer and secretary of Birla Mandir Trust, who had attended a public reading Abhay had held in presence of a popular guru, Mother Anandamoyi. Impressed by Abhay's reading from his Hindi Chaitanya Charitamrita, Mother Anandamoyi had donated 50 and suggested that Abhay also visit a well-known sadhu, Sri Hari Baba, who was lying ill in the hospital. Abhay, accompanied by Naren Das, he had then visited Hari Baba, who had claimed that Abhay's reading put him into asceticism, and meanwhile Naren Das was becoming inclined to help. And in December, he wrote a letter suggesting that everyone extend their helping hand for the successful publication of Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta's various writing in Hindi, English and Bengali. I wish him all success. Abhay would show this and other such letters to prospective supporters. In Delhi, it was not difficult to see government ministers, judges, lawyers, business executives, and religious head. There was always some time willing to hear seriously and occasionally to offer support. Thus, Abhay, with the other two dhotis and kurtas, the Gaudiya Sangha had supplied him with his ability to preach and convince, but with the little support and had no fixed residence, continued his preaching undaunted. Writing and trying to publish was only half of his efforts. The other half was taking part in efforts of for world movement devotees. Through Naren Das, Abhay inquired whether there might be a way he could do his work under the auspices of Bi- Birla Mandir, one of the largest and richest temple in Delhi. Abhay proposed that he be put in charge of propaganda in the English language and both within India and abroad. Since Naren Das considered himself a follower of Sanatana Dharma, Abhay wrote to him explaining how the teaching of Bhagavad Gita set forth the real Sanatan Dharma. Abhay had many ideas about how Sanatana Dharma, as the eternal religion for all living beings, could be expanded and practically applied if Naren Das would but help him. I want to train up 40 educated youths to learn this science of transcendental knowledge and just prepare them for going to foreign countries for missionary work, to start immediately an English paper, or to revive my paper Back to Godhead in the style of Illustrated Weekly of India, to organize a Sankirtan party which shall not only of a good singers and musicians but also used to practice sadhana or self realization. Haribol.
Would you like to read?
Okay, I'll do. Abhay promised that as soon as he had done some groundwork, he, along with men and equipment, could start for foreign countries to propagate his missionary work. But he admitted also that he was externally in dire straits. The above immediately and give me a proper place to live. I must remove from this temporary quarter by Monday next latest. The directors of the Birla Mandir did not take Abhay up on his offer, or he thought of another way of engaging them. He would hold a public meeting at the Birla Mandir to help generate interest in the League of Devotees. He approached Sri R. N. Agarwal, president of the Delhi Municipal Committee, who, after hearing the names of several respectable people who would be attending, agreed to preside over the meeting. Abai set the date for December 22nd and printed 500 announcements and 200 invitation cards. Striking a cosmopolitan note, he stated in his announcement, "By the grace of the Almighty, Delhi is becoming the center of cultural association of the world." The leaders of both Russia and India had recently pointed to the need for cultural contact between all nations, but the highest culture, Abai suggested, was scientific spiritual knowledge. Therefore, the best cultural resources in the world existed in India, and these resources, Abai stressed, should not be left to the unorganized sadhus and sannyasis, but should be taken by important members of society in an organization. December 22nd, Hindustan Times listed the meeting of the League of Devotees in the Today's Engagements column, along with announcement for meetings of the Rotary Club, the Tagore Society, the Indian Council of World Affairs, Bharat Scouts, and the Indian Pharmaceutical Congress. The League's meeting began with a kirtana led by Professor H. Chand, and then A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, explained his movement's objectives. Then Naren Das spoke and afterwards read a number of proposed resolutions from the founder secretary, attesting that the person present supported the League of Devotees and that they recommended that the central government of India also support it as a movement for world peace based on Gandhian principles. After adoption of the resolutions, the meeting closed with another kirtan and prasadam. Abai was convinced that if his well-wishers and fellow humanitarians would support him on a grand scale, he could create a movement for world peace based on the principle of devotional service to Lord Krishna. But his role was simply to present Krishna consciousness to whomever he could. The results were up to Krishna. Abai was aware that the good intention of most of the participants in his Birla Mandir meeting would not go past that one meeting, but he wasn't discouraged. For all his tireless evangelism, he maintained a philosophic jollity. In one sense, he was already fully satisfied. He was happy to be working on behalf of his spiritual master. Although he was changing addresses so fast that his mail could hardly catch up to him, he wrote a newspaper ad for a home study course. Would you like to read next, Lalita?
Okay, thank you. Educational. Study the spiritual secret of Bhagavad Gita at home and be a strong man. Full course fee rupees 50 only. The instruction is imparted not in the ordinary imaginative way of qualified interpretations, but in the parampara system of preceptorial succession. All questions are properly solved. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Students of all communities and nationalities are welcome. He had not published Back to Godhead in 4 years, since 1952, but he decided to revive it. Back to Godhead was a mission worthy of his full attention, and it took all his efforts to collect the funds, compose the articles, see to the printing, and then distribute 1,000 copies. The money he would raise by obtaining interviews and soliciting donations. One donor and friend was Justice Bipin Chandra Mishra, a Supreme Court judge in New Delhi. Justice Mishra. He used to come to me once a month. I gave him donations for his 4-page magazine, but it showed his study of the subject and his earnestness and his devotion to Lord Krishna. He appeared to be a very simple man, and it was pleasant to talk to him. He had a smiling demeanor. The main thing was his humility. He could talk with affection and confidence, and he knew we were discussing things near to God. So every talk with him would sublimate us. I was a rather important personality at that time in religious affairs, but he would not be expected to make any contribution to the main religious life of Delhi at that time because of the language difficulty, because his aim was to reach the English-educated persons, not the Hindi ones, and also because his means and his popularity were not at all established. The magazine did not have a wide appeal amongst these people. Other religious leaders were all well established. The only thing that impressed one and was worth noticing at that time was the simplicity of his abiding faith in God's name and his mission. Writing articles was no problem. By the grace of his spiritual master, he was neither short of ideas nor unable to set them down. Translating and commenting on the Vaishnava scriptures, his pen flowed freely. He was inspired by the miracle of the press, the Brihat Mridanga. The work of writing his message down and printing it in 1,000 times with the awareness and urgency of speaking directly to everyone, not just people in Delhi or India, but everyone, put Abhay into an ecstatic meditation. He would contemplate how copies of Back to Godhead could reach thoughtful people who might read them gratefully. Nor was maintenance a problem. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadev Goswami had declared that the devotee's problem was not food, clothing, or shelter. If one had no bed, he could always lie on the ground and use his arms for a pillow. For clothes, he could always find some rejected garments in the street. For food, he could live on fruits from the trees. And for lodging, he could stay in the mountain caves. Nature supplies all necessities. A transcendentalist cheerlists to maintain himself. Of course, Abhay wasn't living in the mountains or jungle, but in the city of New Delhi. Yet he had virtually adopted the renounced mode Shukadev had said to punish his body or prove himself pure and uncompromising, but because he had to live in poverty if he wanted to regularly produce back to Godhead. For Abhay, it was a great labor of love, and purchasing paper priority even before eating. Neglecting his personal needs for preaching was a manifestation of his faith in Krishna, of which Abhay suffered no scarcity. He had full faith that if he served Krishna, he would be provided for. To work alone was not an insurmountable problem. It was pleasant and to manage the neophyte inmates of the Gaudiya Sangha. The ecstasy of working hard to serve his spiritual master was not a problem. The problem was the condition of the world. Would someone else like to read? Or should we end here? I don't know.
We might have to start again, but I think mine, so maybe we'll go for round 2.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, mine was next, so Srila Govinda probably.
So according to Shastra, the current age creates continual degradation in society. And Abhay could see this evidence every day in Delhi. Delhi, formerly known as Hastinapur, had been the ancient capital of King Yudhishthira, who 5,000 years before, under the patronage of Lord Krishna, had been the most opulent king in the world and whose citizen had been provided for. Now, after 1,000 years of foreign subjugation, India was again independent and New Delhi was the capital. Yet, even in the Abhay's relatively brief 60 years of experience, he had seen Indian culture, which in his childhood had retained much of the original purity of the Vedic age, degrade. Now he saw a society in which the countrymen were victimized by the propaganda that they could be happy in gross materialistic indulgence. The British had introduced tea, tobacco, meat, factories, And now, even after independence, these were a part of India's new way of life. Having driven away the British, the Indians were imitating Western way, and Indian leaders were deliberately ignoring the Vedic principles of God consciousness. The very treasures India was meant to distribute to the whole world. Abe had seen how India had abandoned her spiritual heritage and gone of west. But now, where was that material advancement? Were Indian any happier in their independence than they had been in British days? To Abe, the overpopulated city was a hell of ruffians and fools. All the thousands of poor people were employed in the Bergian steel mills and tire factories. Their living condition had worsened. Abai voiced his concern about these conditions in his Back to Godhead. Could the poor eat the nuts and bolts produced in the factories? Could they be nourished by cinema, television, or sex songs on the radio? The leaders were unable to see that abandoning spiritual principles had led to initially abhor a decadent, a rebellious youth, corruption in every area of civic life, and even economy instability and scarcity. When Abe had been a youth in Calcutta, there had been no cinema billboards advertising lurid sexual fantasies. But now India had developed the third largest movie industry in the world, and film advertisements were all over Delhi. Beef shops, liquor shops had sprung up. The newspapers regularly ran editorial deploring the degradation of young Indian boys who teased innocent on the street. Women leagues complained about increased juvenile promiscuity and the obscene treatment of women in films and advertisement. But there were no upright brahmanas or saintly administrator to do anything about it.
Abai saw the need for a re-spiritualization of society, but society was rushing headlong in the opposite direction. In February, even as Abai was trying to publish his Back to Godhead, Prime Minister Nehru, while speaking with concern of India's crisis of the spirit, simultaneously launched another 5-year plan for rapid industrialization. Everyone from the Prime Minister down to the common man was concerned about the symptomatic problems, but no one seemed to understand that the real problem was the lack of God consciousness. Abai had to deliver the medicine for the ills of Kali Yuga. He knew it was needed on a much larger scale than he could reach on his own, but even to administer one issue of Back to Godhead was almost beyond his means. Writing the articles, typing them, taking them to the printer, and distributing them should not have been the work of one lone impoverished devotee, but in working with his god brothers, he had met with their decided lack of organization and their lack of desire for vigorous preaching. Bhaktisaranga Goswami had seemed determined to keep Sajjana Toshani small, and his mata, like so many others, had been ineffectual in attracting new members. This was the petty mindedness that would cripple preaching. Therefore, he was now working alone on a small scale, happy in his spiritual welfare work, yet aware that his 4-page newspaper was only a drop of water in the desert. In February 1956, while the US was struggling with civil rights, while Khrushchev and Eisenhower were both openly deploring the arms race and were nuclear disarmament talks, and while the Shah of Iran was visiting New Delhi, Abai was trying to print Back to Godhead. In which streets of Delhi, Kumar Jain latest proofs. By walking, he saved money. Believing he was delivering paper from the paper dealer to printer would be rent a rickshaw. He had no chadara, only a lightweight cotton jacket, and he wore rubber shoes. He also wore a cotton hat that covered his ears and tied beneath his chin, protecting him from the 43 wintry mornings, 40-degree wintry mornings, and the sometimes gusty winds. Somebody else would like to read?
I think you can finish it.
Hare Krishna, it's nearly 8. Will we stop there? What do you think?
Yeah.
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 You have to leave at 8 o'clock to Kirtan program in Oxford.
Yeah, that's quite regularly on a Monday, isn't it? Is it every month?
No, one of our Mataji was she's sick, so we have Kirtan for her.
This is
So we do it every Monday in memory of Mataji.